Daniel Harper was a man of structure, a man whose life revolved around blueprints, deadlines, and the ever-expanding skyline of the city. As one of the top architects in the firm, his days bled into nights, consumed by projects and the promise of success. He convinced himself that every extra hour spent at the office was for a better future, one where he and Emily could finally take that trip to Italy she always talked about, one where they could afford their dream house by the lake. What he failed to see was that in building the future, he was neglecting the present. Emily Harper had once been enamored with her husband's ambition. She had fallen in love with the man who would sketch out their dreams on napkins over coffee dates, the man who would press a gentle kiss to her forehead before heading out to conquer the world. But over the years, those kisses became routine, absent-minded gestures before he disappeared into his work. Conversations grew shorter, dinners grew colder, and the space between them became an ever-widening chasm. She never thought she would be the kind of woman who entertained thoughts of infidelity, but loneliness had a way of creeping in, whispering temptations in the quiet moments of neglect. It wasn't that she had stopped loving Daniel. It was that she no longer felt seen. The night of the charity gala was supposed to be a rare evening together, a break from Daniel's hectic schedule. Emily had spent hours getting ready, slipping into an emerald green dress she knew he once loved. As she descended the staircase, she caught the briefest flicker of admiration in his eyes before he checked his watch. "We're running late," he muttered. And just like that, the moment was gone. At the event, Daniel was swept away in conversations with potential clients and colleagues, leaving Emily alone at the bar. She twirled the stem of her wine glass between her fingers, watching the room filled with laughter and easy conversation. That was when she met him. Ryan Carter was the opposite of Daniel in every way. He had an air of effortless charm, an artist's soul reflected in the way he spoke, in the way his hazel eyes held hers just a second longer than necessary. He introduced himself as a painter, and as they talked, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time. Captivated. "You look like someone who's forgotten how to be admired," Ryan observed, his voice smooth but not rehearsed. Emily laughed, the sound surprising even to herself. "And you look like someone who knows exactly what to say to a woman at a bar." He smirked. "I only say what I see." The conversation flowed effortlessly. With Ryan, she wasn't just Daniel's wife or another attendee at the gala. She was Emily, a woman who once had dreams and desires beyond being someone's afterthought. By the time the night ended, Daniel was ready to leave. But Emily felt reluctant to walk away from the easy warmth of Ryan's company. They exchanged nothing but lingering glances, but an invisible thread had been woven between them. In the days that followed, Emily found herself thinking about Ryan more than she cared to admit. It started innocently enough. She searched for his artwork online, followed his social media, found herself lingering in cafes, wondering if she might run into him again. And then, as if fate had heard her silent wishes, she did. One afternoon, while walking through the city, she stumbled upon an art gallery. And there, standing by a canvas that seemed to capture every color of longing, was Ryan. "Emily," he greeted, as if expecting her. "I was hoping I'd see you again." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew she should walk away, but instead, she stepped closer. Emily's world had shifted in a way she couldn't ignore. What had begun as a chance encounter with Ryan had ignited something deep within her, a spark that had been buried beneath years of neglect and routine. She tried to convince herself that it was harmless, that there was no real danger in entertaining the idea of him. But the way she felt around him was intoxicating, and soon, she found herself craving the excitement he provided. She began lying to Daniel. It started small, claiming she had errands to run, coffee dates with friends she never actually met. But soon, her deceptions grew bolder. Afternoon walks turned into stolen hours in hidden cafes, conversations that blurred the lines of innocence, and finally, moments of physical closeness that set her heart racing. One evening, Daniel came home early, catching Emily off guard. She had barely returned from an impromptu meeting with Ryan and still felt the lingering warmth of his touch on her skin. As she set the dinner table, her hands trembled slightly, betraying the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Long day?" Daniel asked, loosening his tie as he leaned against the kitchen counter. Emily forced a smile, hoping the dim lighting concealed the guilt in her eyes. "Yeah, just ran some errands and met up with Claire." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer, but she felt his gaze linger on her longer than usual. Had he noticed something different? Did he sense the change in her? She quickly busied herself with pouring wine, hoping to deflect any further questions. As the weeks passed, her meetings with Ryan became more frequent, more reckless. Each encounter was laced with the thrill of secrecy, the danger of getting caught. And yet, she couldn't stop herself. With Ryan, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. One evening, as she was about to leave to meet Ryan, Daniel called her from the other room. "Emily, wait," he said, his voice firm. She turned, her heart pounding. "What is it?" He hesitated, studying her. "I feel like we haven't been spending much time together lately. How about we go away for the weekend? Just us." A pang of guilt pierced through her. Daniel was trying. He was reaching out, making an effort. But it was too late. She was already too deep into her deception. "That sounds great," she lied, forcing a bright smile. "Let me check my schedule." As she left the house, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She knew she was walking a dangerous path, but she couldn't turn back now. The affair continued with even greater intensity. Emily found herself drawn into a web of desire and deceit, her emotions tangled in contradictions. She would wake up in Daniel's bed, his arm draped over her, and yet her mind would be miles away, replaying the stolen moments with Ryan. Every kiss Daniel placed on her cheek felt like an unspoken apology, every loving gesture a reminder of what she was risking. Ryan, on the other hand, was becoming bolder. He no longer seemed content with just fleeting encounters. He wanted more time, more commitment. "Leave him," he had whispered once, his fingers tracing circles on her bare shoulder as they lay tangled in the sheets. She had laughed it off, pretending it was just a fantasy. But deep down, the idea gnawed at her. Could she? Would she? The first real scare came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She had met Ryan in his loft, their time together stretching longer than planned. As she finally rushed home, the weight of her guilt felt suffocating. But when she stepped through the door, Daniel was sitting on the couch, an unopened bottle of wine in front of him. "Where were you?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Out with Claire," she lied effortlessly, removing her coat. He studied her, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I called Claire," he said after a moment, watching her reaction. "She said she hasn't seen you in weeks." Her heart stopped. A sharp silence filled the air. Her mind scrambled for an answer, but her body betrayed her. She swallowed hard, a clear sign of panic. "Are you seeing someone?" Daniel finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth was right there, hovering between them, but she wasn't ready to say it. Instead, she shook her head, forcing out a weak, "No, of course not." Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what's going on, Emily, but I can feel something isn't right." She placed a hand on his, trying to steady her voice. "It's just stress. I promise." He nodded, but the suspicion in his eyes remained. That night, as Daniel lay asleep beside her, Emily stared at the ceiling, realizing just how precarious her situation had become. She had thought she could keep it all under control, but now the cracks were beginning to show, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Emily's carefully constructed web of lies was beginning to unravel. The tension in her marriage had become unbearable, a constant pressure that threatened to crush her beneath the weight of her deceit. Daniel was watching her more closely now, his eyes scanning her every movement, his questions more probing. The guilt she once managed to suppress was now an ever-present specter, lingering in the corners of every stolen moment with Ryan. The affair had deepened into something she never expected, something more than just lust. She found herself longing for Ryan even when she was with Daniel. The way Ryan looked at her, the way he touched her. It was as if he saw her, the real her, in a way Daniel no longer did. And yet, deep inside, she knew she was living on borrowed time. One evening, after another stolen afternoon in Ryan's arms, Emily returned home to find Daniel sitting in the dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up when she walked in. The silence was deafening. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He took a slow sip before finally meeting her gaze. "Where were you?" She had prepared for this. Another lie, another excuse. "I was out with Claire." A humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "Claire again?" He set the glass down with deliberate care. "Emily, I talked to Claire." Her stomach dropped. "She has no idea what I'm talking about. She says she hasn't seen you in over a month." His voice was eerily calm, but his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. "So tell me again, where were you?" Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. The walls were closing in. She could feel the truth clawing its way to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. She started, but Daniel cut her off. "Are you cheating on me?" The air in the room became suffocating. This was the moment she had feared, the moment she had desperately tried to avoid. But now, faced with the question, she realized there was no way out. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Daniel, I?" His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his face a mixture of anguish and anger. "Just tell me the truth, Emily." A sob escaped her lips, and with it, the final remnants of her facade crumbled. "Yes." The word hung between them like a death sentence. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if the wind had been knocked out of him. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his body tense with emotion. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence was worse than any shouting could have been. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. Emily wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "A few months." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "A few months," he repeated, as if trying to make sense of it. Was it worth it? She hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because no answer would be right. "I never meant for it to happen," she said weakly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "But it did." She reached for him, but he pulled away. "Daniel, please." "Don't," he said sharply. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with something that broke her heart. Betrayal, devastation, disbelief. "I need to think." Then, without another word, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. Emily stood there, frozen, as the sound of his car faded into the night. The weight of what she had done crashed over her, suffocating and relentless. She had shattered something that could never be put back together. And for the first time since the affair began, she wasn't sure she had made the right choice. Hours passed, and Daniel didn't return. She called his phone repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. What if he never came back? What if this was the end? She wasn't sure how long she sat there, waiting. But when the first light of dawn crept through the windows, she knew she had to do something. She grabbed her coat and keys, her heart pounding as she drove through the city, searching for him. She checked his office, their favorite coffee shop, even the park where they used to take Sunday walks. But there was no sign of him. Desperation led her to the last place she ever thought she would go, Ryan's loft. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see her. "Emily? What's wrong?" "I told him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel knows." Ryan's expression shifted, a mix of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "What happened?" "He left." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know where he is." Ryan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe this is for the best." Emily looked up at him, confusion flashing across her face. "What?" "You don't have to live a lie anymore," he said softly. "You and I, we don't have to sneak around. We can finally be together." She recoiled slightly, the weight of his words sinking in. "Ryan, I don't know if I'm ready for that." His brow furrowed. "Emily, you can't have it both ways. You made your choice." Had she? Or had she simply been caught? Doubt clawed at her. The passion she shared with Ryan had been intoxicating, but now, in the cold light of day, she wasn't sure if it was love or just an escape. She had risked everything for him, but standing there, she realized she didn't know what she truly wanted. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ryan frowned and moved to open it, but the moment he did, Emily's breath caught in her throat. Daniel stood there. His eyes flickered between them, and in that moment, the last shred of hope she had of salvaging her marriage crumbled. The moment stretched between them like an eternity. Daniel stood at Ryan's doorstep, his expression unreadable. Emily felt her heartbeat in her throat, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on her like an anchor. Ryan's posture stiffened, his hands still on the door handle, his eyes flicking between Emily and her husband. "Daniel," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. He didn't move, didn't speak. His gaze was cold, calculating. The warmth she had once known in his eyes was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, a hurt that cut far beyond the surface. "I didn't come here to make a scene," Daniel finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "I just needed to see it for myself." Emily felt the walls closing in. She wanted to explain, to make him understand, but what could she possibly say? She had already destroyed everything. Daniel turned to Ryan, his jaw tight. "How long has this been going on?" Ryan straightened, his shoulders squared. "Daniel, I asked you a question," Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp. Ryan exhaled, glancing at Emily before answering. "A few months." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "A few months," he repeated, shaking his head. "That's all it took, huh?" Emily stepped forward. "Daniel, please." No." He held up a hand, silencing her. "You don't get to explain. Not here. Not now." He took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists before releasing. "I just needed to see it with my own eyes. And now I have." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Emily felt something inside her break as she watched him go. She wanted to run after him, to beg him to stay, but her feet wouldn't move. A part of her knew it was already too late. Ryan shut the door, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said after a long pause, "that went about as well as it could have." Emily shot him a glare. "Are you serious?" He sighed. "Emily, what did you expect? He was going to find out eventually." She shook her head, tears burning at the edges of her vision. "I didn't expect it to happen like this." Ryan stepped closer, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "Emily," he he said softly. You don't have to go back to him. She let out a hollow laugh. Go back to him? Ryan, I don't even know if I have that option anymore. Then maybe that's for the best. She stared at him, searching for something in his expression. Was this what she had really wanted? To end her marriage this way? To have Daniel look at her like she was a stranger? I need to go, she muttered, grabbing her coat. Ryan frowned. Go where? I don't know, she admitted, but I can't be here right now. She didn't wait for him to respond before walking out the door. The drive home was a blur. Emily wasn't even sure why she went back to the house. Maybe it was out of habit. Maybe it was because, deep down, she hoped Daniel would be there, waiting for her. But when she stepped inside, the house was empty. The silence was deafening. She wandered through the rooms, each one filled with memories. The couch where they used to sit and watch movies together. The kitchen where they had danced on their anniversary, laughing like teenagers. The bedroom where they had once whispered secrets in the dark. Now, it all felt like a ghost of a life she had destroyed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out with shaking hands. A message from Daniel. We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at the park. Her breath hitched. Was this it? The end? Or was there still a sliver of hope? She didn't sleep that night. When the morning sun finally crept over the horizon, she dressed carefully, her hands trembling as she brushed her hair. She had no idea what Daniel would say, but she knew she had to face him. When she arrived at the park, he was already there, sitting on the bench where they used to meet for coffee. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, she saw something familiar in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but something softer than anger. She sat beside him, unsure of where to begin. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Daniel exhaled. Then just listen. She nodded, clasping her hands in her lap. I don't think I can forgive you, he said, his voice steady. At least not now. She swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding again. But I need to know why, he continued. Was it me? Was I not enough? Emily's heart clenched. Daniel, it wasn't about that. It wasn't about you not being enough. Then what was it? She took a shaky breath. I felt lost, like I was disappearing inside my own life. And Ryan, he made me feel alive again. Daniel flinched but said nothing. I know that's not an excuse, she added quickly. I know I hurt you, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. Silence stretched between them. The wind rustled the leaves around them, a quiet reminder that the world was still moving, even as theirs had fallen apart. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. I don't know if we can fix this. Emily's throat tightened. Do you want to? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he said, I don't know. And with those words, she realized that for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't the one in control. The choice wasn't hers anymore. The consequences of her betrayal had finally caught up with her. Emily sat in her car long after Daniel had walked away. She should have expected his reaction, but hearing the pain in his voice had left her feeling hollow. The weight of her choices had never been heavier. She had lost something precious, and for the first time, she truly understood that some things could never be undone. Her phone vibrated beside her. A message from Ryan. Are you okay? She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was she okay? The question felt absurd. Instead of answering, she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and leaned her forehead against the steering wheel. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what came next. The house felt like a tomb when she returned. The echoes of her life with Daniel haunted every room. She walked past the framed photos on the walls, snapshots of vacations, birthdays, ordinary days that now felt like they belonged to another person. She paused at their wedding photo, running her fingers over the glass. The love in their eyes had been real. Had she killed it forever? A knock on the door startled her. Her heart leaped as she rushed to open it, foolishly hoping it was Daniel. But it wasn't. Ryan stood there, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Hey," he said softly. She stepped aside, letting him in. He scanned the living room, his eyes lingering on the photos before turning to her. "I wanted to check on you." She crossed her arms. "I told you I needed time." "I know," he admitted, "but I don't like the idea of you being alone right now." She sighed, rubbing her arms as if she were cold. "Ryan, I don't know what I want anymore." His expression flickered with something, hurt, maybe frustration, but he nodded. "I get it." He glanced at the floor before looking back up at her. "I meant what I said, though. I don't regret what we had." Emily swallowed hard. "Even now?" He stepped closer. "Even now?" She closed her eyes. She had thought she loved Ryan, but now she wasn't sure of anything. Their affair had been intoxicating, but had it really been love, or just an escape? "I think I need to be alone tonight," she murmured. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead before leaving. She locked the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. Alone. That was what she needed. And for the first time in months, she meant it. The next morning, Emily called Daniel. He didn't answer. She left a voicemail, then another. She needed to see him. Not to beg, not to fix things, but just to talk. She owed him that much. An hour later, he texted her. "Meet me at the cafe." Her hands trembled as she grabbed her coat. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting at their usual table. But everything about him felt different now. Closed off, guarded. As she sat down, he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, not looking at her. "I appreciate you coming," she said softly. He finally met her eyes. "I don't know why I did." She nodded, biting her lip. "I don't either." Silence stretched between them. She searched for the right words, but there weren't any. She had hurt him, betrayed him. There was no justification, no excuse. "I need to ask you something," he said after a long pause. "Was any of it real?" Her heart ached. Yes, of course it was. Then why? His voice cracked on the word, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. Emily swallowed hard. "I wish I had an answer that would make sense. I wish I could go back and change everything. But I can't." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I don't think I can forgive you, Emily." Tears pricked her eyes, but she nodded. "I understand. I need time. Space." Her throat tightened. "So this is it?" "For now." She nodded again, blinking back the tears. "I love you, Daniel." His jaw tensed. "I don't know if that matters anymore." He stood, leaving a few bills on the table, then walked away without looking back. Emily sat there, staring at her untouched coffee. It was over. Her marriage, her affair, everything she thought she had wanted. And now she was left with nothing but regret. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them.